Before we begin, I need you to forget the theatre, forget the red curtain, forget the spotlight, forget the whispering dark, the passive hush of the audience, the safety of plot and catharsis. Forget dialogue, forget the polished actor waiting for his cue like a dog for a treat. Forget everything you think you know about performance, about art, about sanity, about language. Because tonight we are not watching a play. We're not studying a man. We're walking into a haunted room and the door is locking behind us. This episode is about Antonin Artaud. But Antonin Artaud is not a topic. He's not a subject. He's not even a person. Not anymore. He is a trembling force field of nerves. He is a nervous system with no skin. He is the sound your soul makes when it breaks open like a rotten fruit. His life was a fever dream screamed into a notebook. His legacy is ash and saliva. And the theatre he gave us was not a performance, it was a possession. He called it Theatre of Cruelty, and no, not the Netflix kind, not slashers, not horror porn, not blood packets and soundtracks and clever scares. Artaud's cruelty was older, it was sacred, ritualistic, cruelty as confrontation, cruelty as exorcism, cruelty as the only honest language left in a world that had buried its gods beneath 1,000 dead words. You didn't watch Artaud's theatre. You survived it. He wanted to rip the mask off culture, tear the nerves out of your throat and show you the animal hiding behind the language. Artaud didn't believe in acting. He believed in transmission, in infection. He believed in truth, the kind of truth that howls and bleeds. He was an addict, a schizophrenic, a mystic, a poet who couldn't write without breaking into shards. He was institutionalized, electroshocked, exiled. He talked to God. He cursed the Virgin Mary. He traveled to Mexico in search of sacred ritual and came back with ghosts in his lungs. He died with his boots off and his bones humming like a struck bell. In this episode of The Observing Eye, hopefully that set the scene for you, we're going to descend into the madness of Antonin Artaud, but not as tourists. This is not a retrospective. This is not a polite survey of a misunderstood genius. This is a séance, a confrontation, an invocation of the Theatre of Cruelty as a living, shrieking force. We'll explore how Artaud's life and suffering bled directly into his theories of performance. We'll break down what he meant by cruelty, by ritual, by the scream that precedes all meaning. We'll examine the role of madness, not as a failure of reason, but as a portal into deeper truths. And we'll ask the question Artaud asked over and over with his entire body. What happens when the body becomes the language? So, if you've come here for structure, for clean ideas and bulletproof conclusions, I suggest you leave now, because nothing about Artaud fits into a TED Talk. This is not performance, this is plague, this is ritual, this is art that bleeds. 835. Antonin Artaud was born in 1896 in Marseille, France. Born sick, born in pain. That's where it begins. Not with a prophecy or a moment of inspiration, but with an illness. 8 years old, he's laid flat with spinal meningitis. His body shaking, convulsing, rebelling. The nerves in his spine declaring war on the rest of him. They say he recovered. What they don't say is that his body never forgave him for surviving. From that moment on, he was a boy living inside a battlefield, and the war never stopped. Pain became his baseline. Imagine that. Imagine your normal is the constant humming electric current of pain threading through your muscles and joints. Imagine trying to think clearly while every nerve in your body is screaming. You don't get to be calm in that condition. You don't get to sit still, behave, be rational. And when your own body is the enemy, where do you escape to? That question would haunt Artaud for the rest of his life. By the time he reached adolescence, the migraines had arrived. Blinding, splitting, soul-racking. He was prescribed opiates, laudanum, morphine. He took them because he had to. Not for the high, for the silence. For the quiet moments between racks of pain. But the drugs didn't heal him. They fed something darker. They opened cracks. They loosened the hinges on the vault doors inside his mind, and from there, well, that's where things start to get interesting. He was a brilliant student, sure, but he couldn't stay in school. His body kept shutting down, his mind kept catching fire. His parents, wealthy, conventional, didn't know what to do, so they sent him to sanatoriums, psychiatric clinics, places where madness was warehoused like broken furniture. He went in and out of institutions like a revolving door. Diagnosis: depression, melancholia, psychotic episodes, schizophrenia. They stuck labels on him like post-it notes on a bomb. What do you do with a boy who reads Rimbaud and Nietzsche and Lautréamont like holy scripture but can't finish a sentence without drifting into visions? What do you do with a mind that believes language is a trap? What do you do when someone starts to hear voices not because they're hallucinating but because they're listening? He started to write. That was his first exorcism. Poetry as bloodletting. But the words wouldn't behave. They trembled under his hands. Language for Artaud was never a tool. It was a traitor. It didn't obey. It didn't soothe. It bit. So he didn't write for beauty. He wrote like a man on fire, writing messages in his own ash. By the 1920s, he'd clawed his way into the Parisian Avant-Garde. He became an actor. His face, the gaunt, haunted face of a saint in withdrawal, was magnetic. He didn't perform characters. He suffered them. Audiences watched in awe, not because he was talented, but because they couldn't tell if what he was doing was acting or an actual possession. He wrote essays. He joined the Surrealists. He ran a short-lived theatre. He published in literary journals with names like La Révolution Surréaliste. But none of it stuck. He didn't want to play games. The Surrealists wanted to subvert language. Artaud wanted to destroy it. The Surrealists believed in dream logic. Artaud believed dreams were too polite, too orderly. He broke with them eventually, screaming at Breton and the others like a man being exercised backwards. He kept breaking things: friendships, careers, performances, his own body. He once described himself as having no soul, only a burning place where the soul should have been. He was not a man holding madness in check. He was a man made of madness, trying desperately to sculpt it into something holy. And then the visions began in earnest. Not metaphor, not inspiration, real visions. Artaud didn't dabble in metaphor. That's the coward's way. He spoke to the dead. He heard voices telling him that he was being devoured from the inside by parasites. He believed his body was stolen, disassembled, that his organs had been taken out and replaced with demonic imposters. He believed the Catholic Church was performing cosmic surgery on him, not with scalpels, with language, with doctrine, with ritual. And yet, amid all this, he worked. God did he work. His writings during this period are not coherent. They're convulsions, screeds, letters scrawled in all caps, screams rendered into syntax. He sent angry apocalyptic letters to André Gide, to the Pope, to fictional entities. He accused God of theft. He accused civilization of surgical violence. He accused theatre of being dead. By 1936, desperate for a way out of the Western sickness, Artaud traveled to Mexico. He went to the Sierra Madre to commune with the Tarahumara tribe, to take part in their peyote rituals. He called it his spiritual baptism. For a few brief moments, he found peace. Not sanity, not relief, but the kind of ecstatic madness that didn't betray him. He saw theatre not as entertainment, but as a ritual of the cosmos, the actor as a shaman, the stage as a crucible. He came back to France convinced that European art was a cadaver dressed in silk. It got worse. In 1937, he went to Ireland with a walking stick he believed was the staff of St. Patrick. He wandered, hungry, broken, proclaiming that he was the reincarnation of Jesus, that he had to return his staff to its sacred origins. He was arrested for public disturbance and deported back to France in a straitjacket, institutionalized again, this time for good. 9 years. 9 years in a psychiatric hellhole in Rodez. 9 years of electroshock therapy, torture, forced silence. But inside that cage, Artaud burned hotter than ever. He wrote thousands of pages. He wrote with nails, with his own feces at times. He performed exorcisms through phonetics, rants, sound poems, glossolalia. He believed language had been stolen from him by civilization, and he was taking it back letter by letter. By the time he emerged, ragged, broken, radiant, he was no longer a man. He was a raving angel, a wounded prophet, a theatre of one. He performed his final rites on paper and microphone. He recorded his famous "To Have Done with the Judgment of God," which was banned before it could air. Too obscene, too angry, too true. He died in 1948, alone, in a clinic, seated at the foot of his bed with his shoe off. He had a shoe in one hand and a spoon of sugar in the other. He died like a man who had seen too much, screamed too loud, and finally burned through the last layer of skin between himself and the void. Antonin Artaud didn't live a life. He lived an exorcism. He didn't suffer madness. He used it. Not like an artist inspired by his illness. No. Artaud was the illness. Artaud was the method. He leaves us with this question. If you are born into a world that cannot tolerate your sensitivity, your intensity, your pain, does that make you mad? Or does it mean the world is designed to kill the soul and call it sanity? Artaud's body never healed. His mind never rested. But in the crackling static between his seizures and screams, something emerged. Something real, something brutal, something holy. A nervous system on fire. And from that fire, he forged a theatre that still smoulders. There's a particular kind of silence that hangs over a theatre before the curtain rises. It's not peace, it's expectation, manners, an audience collectively bracing itself for plot, for catharsis, for resolution. It's the silence of ritual, domesticated, powdered, perfumed. It smells like ticket stubs and polite applause. Now picture Antonin Artaud stepping onto that stage with a bucket of petrol and a lit match. Artaud wasn't trying to refine theatre. He wasn't interested in improving the dialogue or offering some clever twist on dramatic structure. He wasn't even trying to save theatre. He was trying to kill it, burn it to the foundations, and in the ashes summon something older, wilder, sacred, the Theatre of Cruelty. You hear that phrase and your mind jumps to blood, violence, maybe horror, maybe sadism. But Artaud wasn't talking about cruelty as spectacle. This wasn't about torture scenes or jump scares or Tarantino-level splatter. His cruelty was cosmic, sacred, metaphysical. Cruelty as confrontation. Cruelty as stripping away every lie civilization had wrapped around the human body to make it tolerable. So what was he reacting against? Words. Polite, dead, polished words. Western theatre at the time was locked in the grip of text. The actor was a mouthpiece, the stage was a box, the story was everything. Psychology reigned, dialogue reigned. Theatre had become a museum of manners, a well-lit cage for emotions to be dissected and examined under fluorescent lighting. But Artaud saw language as a coffin, dialogue as embalming fluid. He wanted to exhume the corpse of theatre, rip its mouth open and let the scream out. For Artaud, the scream was the first language, the body was the first instrument. Before speech, before symbols, there was movement, there was gesture, there was breath and rhythm and sweat. He wanted to reach back through history, past Sophocles, past Shakespeare, past Moliere and Ibsen and Chekhov, past a library, past a page, to something primordial, something pre-verbal, pre-human even. Theatre, he believed, had to become ritual again. Not metaphorical ritual, actual ritual, sacred, untranslatable, embodied. He was inspired by Eastern performance traditions, particularly Balinese theatre, which he saw in Paris in 1931. That experience broke something open inside him. The way the Balinese dancers moved, mechanical, precise, alien. The trance of it, the sound, the rhythm, the hypnotic blend of beauty and terror. It bypassed the intellect entirely and hit him right in the gut. And that's what he wanted. Theatre that bypasses the intellect. Theatre that doesn't mean but affects. Not art that explains or comforts, but art that transforms. Not through understanding, but through direct impact, like a body slam to the soul. So he wrote a series of manifestos, eventually collected in his book The Theatre and Its Double, where he laid out his vision. He called for a new language of theatre, a language of spasms, of soundscapes and symbols, a language made of fire, not grammar, of gesture, a poetry in space. He wanted to shatter the hierarchy of text, to elevate movement, lighting, sound, breath, and even silence to equal and often greater status than spoken words. Artaud didn't want scripts. He wanted orchestrations of sensation. In his Theatre of Cruelty, the stage isn't separate from the audience. There is no fourth wall. There is no safe space to sit and judge. The play isn't contained in a rectangle. It explodes. It invades. He imagines stages built like arenas, with the audience surrounded on all sides. He wanted actors to scream above the heads of the spectators, to crawl through the aisles, to chant and flail and bleed right next to you. He wanted to make the theatre inhospitable. He wanted to make it dangerous. And not because danger is sexy, because only danger is real. Only danger shakes people loose from their sleepwalking selves. In Artaud's vision, the actor is not a vessel for interpretation. The actor is a sacrifice, a shaman, someone who burns themselves alive on stage so that the audience can glimpse something sacred. The performance isn't entertainment, it's exorcism. He wrote, "The actor is like the warrior in a primitive tribe who dances the war dance before the fight, in a ritual where he becomes the god of war himself. The actor becomes the symbol, not represents it, becomes it, not a character, not a role, a force." Artaud wanted to return theatre to its roots in plague and possession. He often spoke of the theatre as a kind of disease, not metaphorically, literally. He wrote that theatre, like the plague, reveals the underlying rottenness of a society. When a plague breaks out, all the masks come off, hypocrisy disintegrates, the repressed erupts, death dances in the streets, and for Artaud, that was what theatre had to do. Rip the social mask from the face. Let the truth out. But Artaud's cruelty wasn't just aimed at the audience, it was aimed at the actors too. The actors had to undergo a transformation. They had to be willing to strip themselves down to the raw nerve. He wrote about muscular hieroglyphs, the idea that movement could carry meaning deeper than words. He wanted actors trained in physical expression, not diction. He wanted actors to moan and twist and convulse, not act emotions, but embody them. He was crafting a theatre of bodies possessed by forces they could barely comprehend. You can't do this kind of theatre with ego. You can't do it with safety. Artaud's actor had to lose themselves, had to risk madness, had to surrender. And this is where we start to see that Artaud's Theatre of Cruelty wasn't really theatre at all, not in the way we think of it. It wasn't a genre, it wasn't a style. It was a metaphysical assault, a rupture in the symbolic order. A performance meant not to show something about the world, but to unmake the world itself. He was tearing down the proscenium. The whole idea of separation, audience and actor, fiction and reality, inside and outside. He wanted to obliterate that. Because life isn't compartmentalized. Pain doesn't follow a three-act structure. Artaud wanted a theatre that mimicked existence in its most raw, uncontainable form. Cruelty for Artaud was necessary because reality itself is cruel. Civilization anesthetizes us to that. It gives us stories and morals, endings with resolution, protagonists we can root for. It gives us rules, curtains, entrances and exits. But the world isn't like that. The world is war, disease, screaming children, ecstasy and grief and betrayal and orgasm all mashed into one trembling body. The world is too much. Artaud didn't want theatre to protect us from that. He wanted theatre to return us to it. We are not free, and the sky can still fall on our heads, and theatre has to remind us of that. He believed that art had one purpose, to awaken us to our condition, not gently, not with subtle metaphor or clever dialogue, but violently, with holy cruelty. So what is the Theatre of Cruelty? It is a sacred rite that destroys language to release meaning. It is a battlefield where the body becomes the weapon and the altar. It is not a show. It is not a play. It is an event of the soul. It asks us to feel before we understand, to suffer before we rationalize, to wake up before we die. And in a culture built on sedation, Artaud's cruelty might be the most merciful thing we have left. The world tolerates a certain kind of madness, the quirky kind, the genius in slippers kind, the Van Gogh's ear kind, the kind that fuels tortured artist narratives and Instagram quotes about embracing your demons. Then there's Antonin Artaud. His madness wasn't romantic, it wasn't fuel for creativity, it was the creativity. It wasn't a deviation from reason, it was a complete rejection of reason as a valid compass for living. Artaud didn't use madness like a spice in a recipe. He swallowed it whole, bones and all, and let it tear through his intestines until something divine crawled out the other side. To Artaud, madness wasn't pathology. It wasn't a disease. It was a portal, a dimension, a state of being closer to the truth than anything logic could build. And he didn't want to escape it. He wanted to live inside it, let it speak through him, let it wreck him. So, we're going to stop pretending we're talking about theatre, because it isn't about sets or costumes. This is about apocalypse, about the body as battleground, about schizophrenia not as a diagnosis but as a theology. Artaud wrote from the edge of collapse. He didn't write essays, he wrote curses, spells, litanies. Every sentence is a seizure, every paragraph a possession. Reading him feels like watching a man being eaten alive by his own metaphors, but there's clarity in it, a terrible clarity. He once wrote, "I have swallowed a terrible mouthful of blood and I've said nothing." What he meant was language betrayed him. The mouth was a wound, thought was a cage. He wasn't trying to express himself, he was trying to expel something. He wasn't writing, he was screaming in ink. And behind that scream was schizophrenia. Let's be precise. Artaud wasn't a performance of madness. He was a textbook case, except no textbook could contain him. He was diagnosed repeatedly. Severe psychosis, schizophrenia, persecution delusions. He believed his organs were being manipulated by outside forces. He claimed people were trying to steal his soul through his bones. He thought his body was no longer his own. And maybe it wasn't. Artaud saw the body as a battleground, a ritual site, a place where powers fought, ancient and invisible. His madness wasn't incoherent. It had a language, a cosmology. He described his body as being under constant attack, parasites, spells, demonic forces. But instead of trying to get rid of the hallucinations, he welcomed them. He listened to them. He performed them. He turned his body into a transmitter. You see, he wasn't hallucinating meaninglessly. He was mythologizing, turning his madness into a living theatre. The world saw a man screaming at clouds. Artaud saw a man fighting God with his fingernails. In his letters from Rodez, the asylum where he was imprisoned for nearly a decade, he talks about being electroshocked until his thoughts shattered like glass. He talks about entities crawling into his spine. He talks about language being stolen from him and replaced with dead symbols. But still, he writes. Because even when the world took away his theatre, took away his freedom, took away his autonomy, he still had the scream. And that's what we're really talking about here. Not madness as failure, but madness as method. Artaud turned schizophrenia into structure. He treated delusion like liturgy. He didn't differentiate between hallucination and revelation. He took his visions seriously, deadly seriously. He believed his mind was opening into something more real, not less. Western psychiatry called it a breakdown. Artaud called it possession. And this is where things get terrifying and sacred and utterly unstageable. Artaud believed the actor should enter that state, not pretend to, not simulate it, but actually enter it. To step out onto the stage and not perform madness, but inhabit it, surrender to it, let the body become a channel, let the nerves become antennae for forces the audience couldn't name. He wanted the stage to become a séance, a ritual site. Not a metaphor, not a story. Think of the ancient rituals, the shaman dancing himself into frenzy, the priestess speaking in tongues, the devotee cutting their flesh open under the gaze of the gods. This was Artaud's theatre. Possession, not performance. Convulsion, not choreography. He wrote, "The actor is a true athlete of the heart, not the mind, the heart, the spirit, the interior storm." This is where Artaud breaks from every Western theatrical tradition. Stanislavski says, understand the character. Brecht says, show the character's context. Artaud says, become the fire. Don't represent the thing, be the thing. Don't simulate grief, wail until your throat bleeds. Don't portray madness, let it take you. Risk your mind for the truth of a moment. He wanted actors trained not in emotion but in possession, physical discipline so extreme it shattered identity, so much repetition, breath control, trance that the body broke through language into a space where meaning erupted in pure form, gesture as invocation. And why? Because the world, Artaud believed, was already mad. Civilization was the grand delusion. To act normal in a sick world was the real insanity. Artaud saw our churches, our governments, our families, our schools, all of it, as machinery designed to suppress the scream, to make us polite, to crush the sacred animal inside us into something that can sit still and pay taxes. So he flipped the script. Madness wasn't the problem. It was the only possible response. A sacred violence, a ritual act of destruction. Destroy the self to reach the soul, burn down the ego to glimpse the divine. Artaud believed in violence, not as cruelty but as revelation. Violence to the senses, violence to the psyche, violence to the illusion. Because something has to die for something sacred to be born. This is why he embraced self-mutilation, not theatrically, literally. He pulled out his own teeth, he clawed at his face, he spoke of crucifying himself on language. Because in his vision, the artist must suffer, not romantically, but actually, physically. The body must be shattered to be remade. He was a living theatre. His madness wasn't a subject, it was a method, a medium. He carried it like a torch, lit it in his own ribcage and tried to burn the stage down with it. And what do we do with that? We file it away. We say, he was unwell, he was unstable. We quote his manifestos but never live them. We use his madness as metaphor but we never touch its heat. We appropriate his screams and dress them in academic citations. But what if he wasn't delusional? What if his schizophrenia was insight misread by an insane culture? What if his pain was not dysfunction, but initiation? We love the idea of the tortured artist as long as they stay cute and clever and publishable. But Artaud did not play nice. He didn't explain himself. He didn't make his trauma digestible. He turned it into a performance too intense to witness and too real to fake. Artaud's madness wasn't a solo act. It was a mirror. He screamed so we'd remember our own forgotten scream. He broke himself so we'd feel the cracks in our own skin. He called for sacred violence because we live in anesthetized violence every day and pretend it's normal. He invited us to go mad with him, not to lose ourselves, but to find the part of us that's been buried beneath language, beneath civility, beneath the coffin lid of sanity. He didn't want you to understand him. He wanted you to feel him, in your throat, in your bones, in the place you forgot how to name. That's madness as method. That's possession as performance. That's sacred violence. That's Artaud. And if you're still here, still listening, maybe you're ready for the next act. Because this isn't over, not even close. The gods haven't arrived yet, the stage is still dripping, and there's a scream still trapped in your chest. Imagine a man chewing through the bars of his cage, not protesting, just gnawing with his molars until they snap, until blood foams at the lips and bone dust collects under his chin like gunpowder. That's Antonin Artaud in his final years, a man who's been electroshocked into silence, drugged into compliance, starved of ritual and purpose, but who somehow finds a microphone. And when he does, what comes out isn't a message, it's a bomb. To have done with the judgment of God. That was the title of his last recorded work, a radio play, or what was supposed to be a radio play. Commissioned by French radio in 1947, recorded in 1948, immediately banned before it could air. Too obscene, too insane, too heretical, too raw. It was Artaud's final scream, his last spell, his closing ritual, his middle finger aimed straight at the crucifix. And if you think that title's provocative, you've not heard the content. Artaud wasn't interested in symbolic blasphemy. He didn't want to shock you with naughty words or scandalous metaphors. He wanted to reach into the ribcage of civilization and rip out the manufactured heart beating there. The one labelled God, the one labelled law, the one labelled order. He wanted to throw it in your lap, still twitching, and say, "See? This is the lie you worship. Artaud wasn't trying to debate theology. He was staging an exorcism, not of demons, but of civilization itself. Artaud had been watching how we built systems out of fear, watching how we replaced instinct with structure, watching how we sterilized the body, castrated the soul, lobotomized desire. And we didn't do it in the name of safety, we did it in the name of God, the great accountant in the sky balancing ledgers of sin, the cosmic bureaucrat stamping our desires with rejection slips. In To Have Done with the Judgment of God, Artaud tears through that illusion like a dog through flesh. He calls God a pervert. He says God was born dead. He calls the church a factory for broken minds. He mocks the sacraments. He dismembers the Eucharist. He desecrates the language of prayer. And he doesn't do it with cool, reasoned argument. He does it with spit and bile. He performs it like a man trying to purge something that's been rotting in his gut for centuries. The play is made of rants, screeches, laughter, groans. It's written in a hybrid of French, glossolalia, sound poetry, and something else, something that doesn't translate. The rhythm is off-kilter. The logic is fractal. There are moments when the voice breaks down into pure sound, like a throat retching syllables that don't exist yet, and in between those eruptions are some of the most brutal insights ever spoken aloud. Artaud says the human body has been enslaved by ideology. He says doctors and priests are the same thing, agents of castration. He says we no longer have bodies, we have diagrams. He says civilization is a ritual of mutilation wearing a silk tie. And he doesn't say this politely. He vomits it out. And the thing is, he's not wrong. Because what Artaud saw, clearer than anyone, was that modern society isn't built to nurture the human spirit. It's built to contain it, to sterilize it, to put it in a box and call it sanity, to take the wild, trembling animal that we are and fit it into a cubicle, a tax code, a marriage license, a diagnosis. And when that animal howls, we call it insanity. Artaud looked at the entire structure of Western civilization, from Plato to Freud, from Christ to capitalism, and saw one unbroken line of repression, a vast machinery built to silence the scream. And he wanted to destroy it, not with theory, not with politics, with theatre, with performance, with the sound of the human body remembering what it was before civilization strangled it. You see, Artaud believed the body held knowledge that the mind had forgotten. Sacred knowledge, prehistoric knowledge. The scream, the spasm, the ritual convulsion, these weren't symbols of madness. They were doorways to power, to truth, to what he called a body without organs. That phrase, a body without organs, would later be picked up by Deleuze and Guattari and turned into a cornerstone of post-structuralist theory. But for Artaud, it wasn't a concept, it was an experience. He wanted to reach a state where the body was no longer defined by function, not a mouth for speech, not a hand for labor. He wanted a body that just was, a body that existed outside of civilization's scripts, a body that screamed its own existence. The judgment of God in Artaud's eyes was nothing more than the original trauma, the primal betrayal, the moment the human spirit was told, no, not like that, you must obey. And that obedience became our theology, our politics, our art, our love. We became creatures of compromise, of self-denial, of internalized rules, and we called that progress. But Artaud didn't want progress. He wanted rupture. In his letters, he fantasized about plagues, not because he wanted people to suffer, but because only in plague, he believed, do people remember what's real. Only in plague do the polite lies burn away and the sacred body reappears. And theatre, he said, must be that plague. To have done with the judgment of God is not a play. It's a contagion. It infects you. It bypasses meaning. It makes your skin crawl, your stomach churn, your heartbeat change. You don't understand it. You receive it, like a curse, like a spell. It was banned because it worked. The French Radio Commission said it was obscene. They said it was too violent, too blasphemous, too unstable. What they meant was it was too honest. Artaud wasn't just attacking religion. He was attacking the whole machinery of repression, and not from the outside like some edgy atheist with a blog. He was attacking it from within, from inside the institution of madness, from inside the wound of the soul. He had been judged over and over, by doctors, by priests, by governments, by gods, and he was done. To have done with the judgment of God means to stop internalizing the cage, to stop believing you are wrong for feeling too much, for dreaming too big. To have done with the judgment of God is to reclaim your body, to reclaim your breath. It means saying no, not just to theology, but to civilization, to sanity, to shame. It means becoming dangerous again, becoming sacred again, becoming alive again. Artaud didn't want to be saved, he didn't want to be cured, he wanted to burn. He wanted to rip open the seams of civilization and let the gods come screaming out. Not the old gods, not the silent ones, the new ones, the wet, raw, newborn gods that live in the theatre of the body. And here's the final cruelty. Artaud died before he could see the plague spread. He died alone, clutching his shoe, muttering spells into a spoon. But he left behind the scream, the sacred scream, the one that still echoes in performance art, in avant-garde theatre, in post-structuralist theory, in the haunted corners of your own nervous system. To have done with the judgment of God was never broadcast at the time, although you can listen to it now. In fact, I'm going to put it up on the website alongside this episode if you are really intrigued to have a listen to it. And if you do listen to it, don't analyze it, don't translate it, don't explain it. Just sit with it. You don't walk away from a fire like Artaud and not smell of smoke. His ideas don't die when he dies. His bones went into the ground, sure, but the scream, that still travels, that still possesses, like plague spores hiding in the seams of a velvet curtain. You think the show is over, but the sickness has already entered the bloodstream. So what becomes of a man like that? What becomes of a theatre of madness, a ritual of sacred violence? A performance meant to gut its audience like a fish and show them what meaning really looks like. Artaud didn't leave a movement, he left a contamination. Not a school of thought, but a contagion of the nervous system. His legacy isn't clean because Artaud doesn't stay where you put him. He flinches, he burns, he breaks out of the petri dish. But still we try. In the decades after his death, artists, thinkers and misfits began to borrow his fire, or try to, but most of them wore gloves, because touching Artaud directly without filters, without translation, risks madness. It risks becoming what he became, a raw, unmediated scream. Let's begin with the theatre. You can't talk about experimental performance in the 20th century without running face first into Artaud's ghost. You find him in Jerzy Grotowski, the Polish director who called for a poor theatre, stripped of props, costumes and illusions, where the actor is the only sacred material. Grotowski's actors rehearsed like monks. They screamed, they wept, they convulsed. The stage became a kind of monastery of pain. Artaud would have nodded, or screamed in approval. And then there's Peter Brook, who once asked, what is theatre for if not to make the invisible visible? Brook dug deep into ritual, into physicality, into language that breaks itself. He staged Marat Sade, a play that turns performance into an asylum, history into hysteria. Brook loved Artaud, admired him, quoted him, but never fully became him. Because Brook still believed in structure, Artaud didn't. We see Artaud's fingerprints smeared across the living theatre, with Julian Beck and Judith Malina leading naked anarchists into the streets, screaming revolution and ecstasy. We see it in Buto, the Japanese dance of the grotesque, born from the ashes of Hiroshima, where bodies move like nightmares and silence is louder than music. Artaud's Theatre of Cruelty gave performers permission to be raw, not real, not naturalistic, raw, animal, pre-human. He showed us that the body is a temple and a trap and a weapon and a poem. He shattered the illusion that acting was about pretending. For Artaud, the actor wasn't pretending to feel. They were feeling instead of you, burning in your place, bearing the wound on your behalf. But here's the problem. When a man sets himself on fire to show you what pain is, you can't just go and repackage that as a drama workshop. And that's what happened. Because legacy isn't fair. Influence isn't sacred. It's parasitic. It creeps, it dilutes, and slowly, the Theatre of Cruelty became a style, a mood board, something you could teach in a university without risking your tenure. They took Artaud's rituals and turned them into exercises. His manifestos became syllabus readings. His screams became topics of discussion. You can see it in modern drama programs. Let's do an Artaud piece, meaning let's add some screams, some strange lighting, and maybe roll around on the floor a bit. Let's be weird. Let's be avant-garde for 15 minutes, then pack it away before anyone gets hurt. Artaud's work was never about style. It was never aesthetic. It was sacrament. He didn't scream for attention. He screamed because his soul was on fire. He didn't write glossolalia to confuse you. He did it because language had betrayed him. He didn't talk about the body because it was trendy. He did it because it was all he had left after the world took his mind. And yet, we appropriate him. We quote him to sound edgy. We invoke him to justify nonsense. We cosplay his madness on stage and then go out for drinks afterward and congratulate ourselves on how transgressive we were. But Artaud didn't perform madness. He lived it. He suffered it. And most of us are too scared to go where he went. Too scared to destroy the self. Too scared to let the sacred in. To follow Artaud all the way means breaking something in yourself that doesn't grow back. Still, his legacy survives. In the broken places. In the unfinished performances. In the artists who can't explain why they're doing what they're doing but have to. Because it's not a choice, it's a possession. Performance art owes him a spinal cord. Every body used as canvas, every scream used as brushstroke, every boundary violated in the name of truth. That's Artaud. From Marina Abramovich staring down silence to Ron Athay piercing flesh as sacrament, Artaud is there, twitching under the skin. In literature, his fingerprints appear in the rants of Kathy Acker, the surreal hallucinations of William Burroughs, the psychic implosions of Clarice Lispector. In philosophy, Deleuze and Guattari called him a prophet. His body without organs became their model for anti-capitalist, anti-psychiatric liberation. Foucault, too, bowed his head. Artaud is the limit case, the outside of the outside. Even in music, Artaud's scream echoes. You hear it in the howl of the Amanda Gallas, in the brutal chaos of throbbing gristle, in punk, in black metal, in noise. But let's not lie to ourselves. Most people, most artists, don't digest Artaud. They nibble at his corpse. They sample him like an aperitif. They put a quote in their program notes and call it homage. But Artaud is not a taste. He's a total meal, and he will eat you in return. You don't influence people by being Artaud. You infect them. You leave something behind that doesn't go away. A parasite of fire, a virus of truth, a worm in the nervous system. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to continue, not as a person, as a force, as a method of becoming, as a scream passed down from throat to throat like a sacred disease. And that's where the real legacy lives. Not in the archives, not in respectful homages, but in the actors who tremble before every show because they don't know what will come out of them. In the artists who can't explain why their work looks like a wound but know it's the only thing that feels real. In the audience member who leaves the theatre and can't stop shaking, not because they understood what they saw, but because something inside them was touched, opened, burned. Artaud is still here, in the tremor, in the theatre that dares to forget itself. And the question that hangs over all of us now, the final cruelty, is this. Have we earned the right to invoke him? Have we suffered enough, risked enough, burned enough? Or are we just tourists in his inferno, trying to snap a few aesthetic selfies before returning to comfort? What's left when the performance ends and no one claps? What's left when the stage has been salted, when the masks are melting, when the actors are vomiting blood and no one remembers the lines because there were no lines, only sound, only bodies contorted into hieroglyphs of agony and ecstasy and holy, inarticulate rage? What's left when Antonin Artaud finishes screaming? Well, you are, of course, sitting here, listening to this, heart beating a little faster than it should be, throat tight and stomach a little sick. Congratulations, you've survived the ritual, but you're not clean. Because Artaud doesn't leave you unmarked. He stains, he tattoos. His ideas live under the skin like fever. You might walk away from this episode and feel fine, maybe tomorrow too. But next week you'll hear someone mention art or theatre or God, and you'll feel something shift. A tension. A low growl under the surface. The echo of a scream that didn't come from your mouth but feels like it could have. That's Artaud. You don't remember him, you carry him, you carry his burn. So let's sit in that for a moment. Let's not rush to meaning. Let's not file this away as interesting, and let's not intellectualize the wound. Because this episode wasn't just about Antonin Artaud. When are these episodes just about the person that we're talking about? It's going to involve you, isn't it? And it's going to be the part of you that's never been allowed to speak. The part of you that language never reached. The animal, the oracle, the shaking limb under the conference room table. The dream you keep having where your mouth is sewn shut. The time you almost screamed in public and didn't, and you've never been the same since. Artaud lived in that space, and not comfortably, not gracefully. He howled. He tore his own flesh. He drank poison and wrote poems in his own shit. He cracked himself open and said, "This is truth. Not the polished kind, but the raw truth. The embarrassing truth. The unbearable, ecstatic, unstageable truth of being alive in a world that wants you numb." He didn't offer solutions. He refused to. He hated conclusions. He spat on resolution. He had no interest in your comfort. He certainly wasn't a guru. So what do we do with him? That's the question this whole episode has circled, isn't it? What do we do with Antonin Artaud? Do we study him? Quote him? Lock him in the attic of Avant-Garde history and dust him off when we need to feel edgy? Or do we risk something? Do we take the scream seriously? Because that's what he asked, over and over, in every letter, every essay, every performance, every tortured hallucination. Will you take this scream seriously? Not as metaphor, not as symbol, as truth. Maybe madness isn't the disease. Maybe it's the only sane reaction to a sick world. Maybe schizophrenia is just consciousness breaking its leash. Maybe theatre isn't entertainment, it's exorcism. Maybe language isn't salvation, it's the cage. And maybe the body, the twitching, sweating, shaking, screaming body is the last sacred thing we have left. If that's true, then Artaud wasn't just a playwright. He was a prophet, a shaman, a martyr crucified on the alphabet. And the Theatre of Cruelty wasn't cruelty at all. It was mercy, a sacred violence designed to wake you up before it's too late. So here's your choice. You can leave this episode and forget everything. Or you can listen to the silence beneath your thoughts, to the pressure in your chest, to the scream that's been waiting to come out since you were a child. Let it out. Don't dress it up. Don't make it pretty. Don't turn it into art. Just scream. Because Artaud is still listening. Somewhere in the broken circuitry of the world, his nervous system is still on fire. And if you scream honestly enough and loud enough and from deep enough, he might answer. Not in words, not in comfort, but in flames. And that, my friends, is the end of the play. The lights are gone. The stage is ashes. The curtain is your skin. And the next act is yours. Thank you, you beautiful lot, for joining me on this expedition into the mad world of Antonin Artaud this week. Hope you found it at least a little bit interesting. And of course, if you did like the episode, please feel free to share, subscribe, and all of the other shit that people say on these sorts of platforms to try and increase, subscription levels and market engagement and all of that bullshit. On the theme of market engagement and bullshit, we do have social media. We're on, what are we on? TikTok, Instagram, X, whatever it is now, with the handle @TheObservingEye. And we're on YouTube, which I imagine you may have found us on anyway, which is youtube.com/@TheObservingEye. So there's videos and stuff on there instead of just the audio. And of course, we have a website on Substack at the minute called theobservingeye.com. So that's where you can go and see all of the raw material in its natural state over there, without adverts, obviously. Yeah, if you are listening on YouTube, I apologise for the adverts. They really grate me, but I can't turn them off yet. So hopefully we'll get to a point where I can in the near future. If you do want to listen to it without adverts, then go and check it out on the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of the usual platforms. That is everything this week, I think. Oh yeah, I forget this. I've got an email address. You can email me if you want. I do answer them. My email is david@theobservingeye.com. You can drop me a message and we can wax philosophy. We can get all philosophical. Yeah, I'm happy to take ideas and comments and thoughts for what you want to hear about in upcoming episodes. So feel free to drop me a message. I will answer as soon as I can, which is normally in about a day or so. I think that's everything. I feel like I've rambled through that outro, but we've covered all the bases, which is cool. As always, really appreciate your time. Really good to have you here and, putting up with my philosophical ramblings about all sorts of mad shit that I come across. So yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much for being with us. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.